The Bible is full of images expressing themes that run right through the whole narrative. We need to examine each of these images closely. We need to see how they all connect us to the larger story. We need to read the images. The well-known opening of John's Gospel, "In the beginning was the Word," doesn't just stop with the word, it moves on quickly to light, and it makes the theme of light quite central to what is going to be coming up in the rest of the text. Of course, as with other things in the prologue, John doesn't do this obviously using the same idea in chapter after chapter after chapter, but what he says here in the prologue tells us to wait for one of the crucial moments in the gospel when Jesus will be revealed as the light of the world. This is how the prologue puts it. You know the opening bit. "In the beginning was the Word was close beside God, and the Word was God. In the beginning he was close beside God. All things came into existence through him. Not one thing that exists came into existence without him." Then, verse 4, "Life was in him, and this life was the light of the human race. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it." Already we have a paradox, it seems. This is God, the Creator, coming into his world, shining with light, but there is darkness as well. And though the darkness doesn't overcome it, the fact that he says that indicates that the darkness seems to be trying to overcome it. John's Gospel as a battle between the light and the dark? Well, in a sense, yes. And then he goes on. He talks about John the Baptist, sent from God. He came, verse 7, as evidence, to give evidence about the light, so that everyone might believe. He was not himself the light, but he came to give evidence about the light. John repeats it again and again. Verse 8, verse 9, "The true light which gives light to every human being was coming into the world." And then he leaves the theme and goes on and develops other ideas. But you see how he is so concerned to say what matters about Jesus is that he is shining God's light into the darkness of the world. And of course, like almost everything else in John's prologue to his gospel, this is a direct echo of Genesis. Genesis chapter 1, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. It's the first thing that happens right at the beginning of creation. And John wants to say, this is how you must see, this is the first way of interpreting Jesus right at the beginning of the gospel. And so from there on, we have this sense that all the prophecies about light, all the symbols of light in the Old Testament are going to land in a new way and do a new thing in and through the story that John is going to be telling. In the book of Exodus, when great darkness comes upon the people of Egypt, as God is bringing the plagues in Egypt to a climax, the rest of Egypt is in darkness at one point, but the people of Israel have light, and it's not long after that that God rescues them at Passover time. That's Exodus chapter 10. And this theme of light then continues through the Old Testament. The psalm says, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom then shall I fear?" I know that text well because it's the motto of my university, and it's on the ceiling in all the crests of the ceiling of the rooms where we used to do the exams, and I used to look back and think, "Dominus illuminatio mea," the Lord is my light. A wonderful psalm text from Psalm 27, but so many other passages as well in the Old Testament. But then coming forward into John's Gospel again, Jesus is the light of the world. But it's paradoxical, because in chapter 8, verse 12, Jesus says, "I am the light of the world, and people who follow me won't go around in the dark. They'll have the light of life." You'll be living in the light, and people don't believe him. They reject him. They say, "You're just talking about yourself and your evidence is invalid." And Jesus argues with them and says that the Father is bearing witness to him. And then in the next chapter, John 9, Jesus heals a man born blind. And John sees this as one of the great symbols of what the gospel is all about, that all around are people who can't see, and Jesus is opening eyes. And that opening of people's blind eyes is like itself an act of new creation. When Jesus gets basically some mud, he spits on the ground and makes some mud out of his spittle and the dust of the earth, and he spreads the mud on the man's eyes and tells him to go away and wash. It's like God creating human beings from the dust of the earth and breathing into their nostrils the breath of life. This man now can see, but for John he is also a symbol of new creation. And so then the rest of John 9 is all about light and darkness. And it may well be that John is placing this incident at the time of the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem, which, among other things, was a festival of lights, like some other festivals that the Judean people had. But if we think about light in relation to the Gospels, then it's not difficult to see one of the places where this all rushes together. Because though John's Gospel doesn't have a description of the Transfiguration, it is as though the Transfiguration scene from Matthew, Mark and Luke is transposed by John into the whole of his Gospel, so that the theme of light, of Jesus as revealing the Father's light, suffuses all of John's Gospel. But in the Transfiguration itself, for a brief moment, the eyes of the disciples are opened and they can see who Jesus really is and what Jesus really is. And there he is talking with Moses and Elijah, as with the two on the road to Emmaus, interpreting himself in terms of the law and the prophets, the scriptures bearing witness to him, and particularly the scriptures pointing to Jesus as the light of the world. So the whole story of Jesus as light then gives birth to Jesus' vocation to his followers that they should be people of light. Jesus says in Matthew 5, at the heart of the introduction to the Sermon on the Mount, "You are the light of the world." So don't go putting a bucket over the top of the light to stop the light shining. What is he saying? He is saying to his contemporaries, to the people in Judea and Galilee who were following him, you are now called to be for the world what Israel was always supposed to be for the world, the light-bringing people. But watch out, because if you try to keep the light for yourself, then you know what'll happen. It becomes very bright for a while, and then the light goes out. I've often used the image of a lighthouse. I grew up not too far from the northeast shore of England, and there were lighthouses that you could see from miles away. And if you go and visit those lighthouses, they have, of course, windows around the light to let the light out. But Jesus is warning against the danger of putting mirrors around the light, because then you can flatter yourselves that of course you're people of light, because it's all very bright in here, but you're supposed to be shining the light out there into the world. Jesus' vocation to be kingdom people is the vocation to be the light of the world. So to live as individuals, but more particularly as a community, the followers of Jesus, the church if you like, to be the people through whom the light will resonate out into the world. Paul in particular picks up this theme several times when he's talking about his own ministry. One of Paul's favourite texts is from Isaiah 49, where the servant of the Lord is told, "It's too little a thing that you should be my servant in order to restore the tribes of Israel. I will make you a light to the Gentiles, so that my glory may extend to the end of the world." Paul refers to that passage 4 or 5 times from Isaiah 49 in his writings. And when he's summarizing his own public career, when he's giving an account of it in the book of Acts to the people who are in effect sitting in judgment on him, the Roman governor Festus and King Herod Agrippa II, when he's talking about how he was called by Jesus on the road to Damascus. Jesus said to him, you are going to be sent to the nations so that you can open their eyes to enable them to turn from darkness to light. The people of Israel were to be the people of light. That light has now been focused on Jesus, and Paul is commissioned to be an agent of that light. And then at the end of his lecture, if that's what it is, to King Agrippa and to Festus, he says, "This is what the prophets and Moses said would happen, that the Messiah would suffer, that he would be the first to rise from the dead," this is Acts 26, verse 23, "and that he would proclaim light to the people and to the nations." That light which lightens everyone that comes into the world. We all have a glimpse of it, but the darkness is struggling to overcome it. And the gospel light is to shine out, to shine into the places where there is at present darkness, so that people can see the light and turn and come to the light and become for themselves people of light. And that theme, which stretches all the way back to Genesis, stretches all the way on to the book of Revelation, where the light in the city, which is the new heavens and the new earth put together, the light is God himself and the Lamb, which is why at last they don't need the sun and the moon anymore, because the light has come to dwell with them in perpetuity. Please feel free to click the link to watch the next video in this sequence.